Back live with you. It's still that leading story that's been developing, of course, developments at Eskom. The board of the ailing power utilities wasting no time in searching for a new chief executive officer. André de Ruyter tendered his resignation today, but will still stay on beyond his stipulated notice period until the 31st of March 2023. When the new chief does arrive, he or she will become the 11th in just over a decade. For more on this, we're joined now by independent energy analyst Clyde Mallinson. Clyde, good to have you, and thank you very much for your time. Others have questioned, for example, the fact that the board obviously received this resignation, and we don't know whether they convinced André de Ruyter to stay or not, but ultimately he's staying. Clearly, whatever convincing, if there was any, was not enough. Or maybe they just didn't convince him at all. What does that tell us about the confidence that they had in the CEO?
No, I think the fact that he's staying on till the end of March, which is beyond what his contract stipulates, speaks to the stature of the man, that he's not walking away from the job. He's going to assist Eskom in basically finding a replacement for himself.
But has he done enough to stave off the country going into stage 7, stage 8, possibly stage 10, if there is such a stage?
You know, what we need to do is dial back 3 years when André de Ruyter started at Eskom, and just remind ourselves that at the beginning of 2020, the first whispers were out about the COVID pandemic. So his tenure there basically started with having to manage COVID, and you couldn't just shut down Eskom. His staff and the people at Eskom, because it's a key point, a key national facility, all the different mines had to work through the COVID period. So I can't think of a more difficult way in starting your tenure of a company like Eskom than having to kick off in the midst of COVID. Now, I'm not making any excuses. In fact, what COVID did is it brought us a year or two of reduced demand. And unfortunately, in that period when we had a bit of respite on demand, the disconnect between NERSA, Eskom, and the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy didn't allow André de Ruyter and Eskom to do what needed to be done in that period. They were told, your job is to look after nuclear and coal, and it's not your job to put new electricity onto the grid. That's the job of the IPP office and the DMRE. And that disconnect is what's led us to a large extent to where we sit now. And the disconnect between NERSA and Eskom, you will be aware that Eskom has had to take NERSA to court. I'm guessing now, absolute guess, 5 or 6 times over various things to do with tariffs. And in every instance, Eskom has won that court case. So it's been a legal battle. There's been threats of racism. There's been COVID. And on top of all of that, the coal fleet is now 3 years older than when he started there. So, yeah, it's basically been mission impossible, I'm afraid. And the fact that he has stayed on as long as he had speaks volumes to the man's persistence.
Surely, André de Ruyter, when he took the job, he knew the pressures that come with it, and that power outages or blackouts certainly don't look good on the ANC, especially an ANC that is going into an election in 2024. The country has spent the last week on stage 5 and 6 of blackouts. He surely would have expected that there would be a lot of pressure on him. Was he honest with them about what he can and cannot achieve?
Yes, I think he was fully aware of the pressure. What he wasn't fully aware of was the disconnect between what needed to be done and what he was allowed to do. So you may remember the famous quote where he wanted to build the additional 4,000 to 6,000 megawatts. He wanted Eskom to build it, and he was told it had nothing to do with him and he must stay in his lane. His job was to look after what had already been built, and he shouldn't step out of his lane. So if I were to be critical of André de Ruyter at all, I would say that he wasn't forceful enough, and he navigated the politics of running Eskom in a fashion that he thought was the appropriate fashion, but he should have actually in my opinion, thrown down the gauntlet right at the very start when he took over the reins and said, we can't operate an organization like this where someone else is telling us what we're allowed to build and what we're not allowed to build, when it's very clear from our analysis that we're going to need 4,000 to 6,000 more gigawatts on the grid as quickly as possible. And basically, between the time he started and now, virtually nothing in addition has been procured that has actually been built and is running. He basically didn't expect to not have political and policy and regulatory support. Yeah. He also didn't expect to have to take on the coal mafia and the construction mafia, and I don't think he quite expected the rot within parts of Eskom to be quite as deeply entrenched as it is. So the best way to judge someone like André is to speak to people at Eskom who worked with him and under him. And I haven't yet met a person who's had a bad word to say about him, except perhaps the odd power station manager who got fired for nicking diesel.
Now, the other, of course, point of view is that he really, as you put it, never really wanted to fix this Eskom. In fact, others are saying he even said words like, and I'm paraphrasing, that it would be akin to flogging a dead horse. So as you say, he wanted to actually build a much newer power station than to work with the Eskom that is literally broken at this particular point in time. Do you think that, in a sense, he had no appetite to fix this current Eskom, and therefore that could have been part of his downfall?
I remember the dead horse thing, and he was very sorry that he ever mentioned that particular analogy. What he was really saying is that when a car or a coal power station is near the end of its life, there comes a time when the money you need to spend to keep it working and the inefficiency of the old thing, it uses lots of petrol, smoke comes out the exhaust. There comes a time when you have to acknowledge that this particular power station needs to be shut down in a planned fashion now. And I think that's what he was getting at. You can't breathe new life into old power stations, especially ones that have had their systems damaged right across the board, whether it was through poor quality coal or just running too hard or just being old. You know, as one ages, one discovers that you can't do what you maybe did at your sort of nameplate capacity when you were 26 or something. And I think that's what he meant. And I think some of the leaders who are setting aspirational targets for what we should expect from the coal fleet, quite frankly, I see far too few interviews with the artisans and the engineers that are actually currently in the trenches trying to hold the line, as it were. And if I were to make an assessment of what the possibility is from the coal fleet for the next 10 years, I wouldn't speak to the state president, I wouldn't speak to the minister of the department, I wouldn't even speak to the CEO of Eskom or the board. I'd go and have a cup of coffee with the guys in the trenches and ask them, and they would say, man, this one's not too bad, this one's okay, that one. And I would then tell them, we're expecting to actually retire this fleet sequentially over the next 10 years. And you'll see a sigh of relief on their faces as they say, at last, someone who understands that we're managing the fleet down. We're not suddenly trying to get a flight of the Phoenix and create some miracle and get back to our former glory. Just ain't going to happen.
Solidarity, when I put to them that, of course, bid window 6 has run into some challenges as far as supply chain issues are concerned with China. Of course, the Russia-Ukraine war has meant that the raw materials that are needed to build these power plants have escalated in prices. So the IPPs are now looking as if they would be a very expensive option. Of course, following on the 10-point crisis management, energy management plan the president had put forward, that bid window 6 will be doubled, I think from 2,800 to about 6,000 megawatts or something of that nature. Is that going to now put a bit of a challenge in Eskom pursuing those IPPs?
Well, Eskom doesn't have to be the ones who build renewable. Of course, it can be done anyone can build and supply to anyone who wants to buy. And yes, the prices have gone up. But in fact, I monitor these prices very closely, and the prices for bid window 6 have come out lower than what I anticipated. So I've just actually done it this evening. The average price for wind, I think, was 75 cents, and the lowest price was about 50 cents. And for solar, the lowest price was about 45 cents, and the average is about 58 or 60 cents. So it's still significantly cheaper than coal. It's, a third or a quarter of the price of nuclear. And it's 1/10 of the price of running diesel on the OCGT. So the notion that it's suddenly become expensive, it's become more expensive than it was, but it's not so much to do with supply chain and wars and things. It's more to do with our shocking exchange rate. Our exchange rate is where it is at the moment because of mismanagement of our whole economy, mismanagement of our governance. We not long ago, exchange rate was 13 or 14 to the dollar. So my biggest price increase for wind and solar has not been supply chain wars and everything. It's been the collapse of the South African rand, quite frankly, on the back of instability, both economically and politically.
Energy analyst Clyde Mallinson, appreciate your time. Thanks so much for coming on tonight.